What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Geek Pantheon. I am Eric, and today we're doing it. The most beleaguered and talked about point in all of tabletop role-playing game. How to do villains. That's what we're doing. So, fresh topic for the channel. But I haven't talked about it, and so that means I need to. So, yeah, we're talking villains this week and how to create interesting villains and then how to role play villains in an interesting way. And I think the first important thing to decide is, what is a villain? Because I think that is something that trips up more people than anything else when it comes to designing a compelling villain. Because to me, capital V villain, like the villain of your game, should be somebody that it is satisfying to defeat. Darth Vader, not a villain in my book, because he is redeemable. Spoilers for 1983. Spoilers. He's a redeemable character. He has flaws. He's interesting, and the player characters can empathize and get under the skin and get them to flip and change sides potentially. That's not a villain. Sheev Palpatine, that is a villain. I know that, like, the whole axiom of, like, everybody's a hero in their own story, and I think that's true for everybody except for Emperor Palpatine. That dude knew what he was, and he loved it. And so characters like that are what I mean when I say a villain. Palpatine. Thanos is another good example. A lot of horror movie villains, like Jason from Friday the 13th. Good villain example. You're not going to feel bad for the man murdering people. Well, it's complicated, because those of you that are Friday the 13th fans know that, like, Jason has a really complicated backstory that led him to become this serial murderer of children. And so the same thing for Palpatine and Thanos. You can get into their backstories and mine that for interesting things. But when it comes to who they are within the story that is being told, they should be somebody that it is satisfying to defeat and bring low. So that is a villain. Somebody like Darth Vader is going to be more along the lines of a obstacle or an antagonist or a rival or just a complicated figure from one of the player characters' backstories. But they're not the villain. They're not the driving force behind the evil in your setting, for an example. So somebody that might be like a peer to the party members that maybe, like, they used to know and get along well with, and now all of a sudden they've gone to the dark side and they're all acting all evil and threatening people and stuff and all these things. But there is a twist to them to where they are redeemable. They can be brought back. Then you wouldn't classify them as a villain, and you shouldn't run them as a villain. You shouldn't put your whole campaign story around the idea of defeating them. Because while morally gray philosophical debates are super, at the end of the day, D&D is a game. And a game should be satisfying to win. And what I mean by that is defeating the big bad evil at the end of a campaign. I'm not saying that you can't do interesting things from a storytelling standpoint, because D&D falls into this very weird area, gray area, in fact, where it is a collaborative story being told by a group of individuals around a table. And so you want the characters within that story to be deep and interesting and complicated. But at the same time, it's a game that people are playing for fun, and you want to have a satisfying ending to that. And this might differ for tables out there. You might run campaigns for your table that are just the biggest bummers in the end. Like, you have to kill somebody that you know you shouldn't have to, but just circumstances mean that you gotta do what you gotta do, and so sadness. That's fine for an adventure, in my opinion, at my games. Like, that's great for adventure hooks and, like, underbosses, lieutenants, things like that, or like big personal side quests for PCs. Those complications can reside there. But for the main story of the campaign, I'm going to err towards your capital V villain should lean into those 3 letters, BBE, big, bad, evil. They are big, they're bad, they're evil. Not medium, neutral. But before we continue, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel down below. It sure does help out a whole heck of a lot. And most of you watching this video are not subscribed. YouTube told me so. So please go down there and subscribe to the channel and hang out and watch more videos. That would be real nifty. And be sure to comment down below your ideas on running compelling villains. What did I miss in this video up to this point and in the future? Let me know down below and I'll try to respond and give you my thoughts on your thoughts, and we can have a conversation. That would be neat. So when it comes to creating interesting histories for your villains, because that's where you can make the villain really just compelling, interesting, lots of onion layers to unfurl, is with their history and how they came to be a villain. And I'm going to reference a lot of movie villains, and a lot of these villain videos you'll see people talk about, like, use Palpatine as an inspiration for these reasons. I don't really love that. There's not a good alternative unless I was referencing like other like actual play shows with villains, but I only have a couple frames of reference, and I'm just going to stick to movies because I know that most people are going to understand those references. But the reason I don't like movie villains as a comparison is, like, Thanos, we have to get through like 20 movies of the MCU before the heroes even meet the villain. And that's not compelling to me. The villain should be a present force within the story. But we'll get more into that in a little bit. But from crafting a character history for the villain, you could obviously just spend some time thinking about some points of inspiration, like Jason from Friday the 13th that I talked about before. Like, he almost drowned or did drown and then was resurrected. I know that his mom was the killer in the first one because her son died. Jason died, and the camp counselors are responsible, so she murders them, which is not appropriate. But then in the second one's on, it's actually Jason. So I don't know if he got resurrected or he just didn't actually drown. Anyway, you can tell a compelling character history with that of, like, you know, the villain, when they were a child, was put into the care of some authority figures that should not have been given that responsibility, but they were irresponsible and led to their death or their near death, and they were brought back as like a spirit of vengeance against the people that let him die. Or you could go the mom route and be like, these people caused her son to die, and she has now detached like from empathy so much to where she's trying to murder people. Or Thanos is an example of somebody who saw their family and civilization destroyed and has gone down a very radical path to try and fix the problem that destroyed their world, family, but taken it way too far, and so the heroes have to stop them. There's another, and so you could take points of inspiration like that and do something interesting, which, you know, steal to your heart's content. But if you want to do something a bit more chaotic, so the DMG has rollable tables for villains. I love rollable tables. And you can roll on that table to determine your villain's motivation. And so you could do that to, like, come up with, what does your villain want? What are they trying to accomplish? Like, where are they at now? And then go to Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Go to chapter 1, This Is Your Life, to like the life event section. Also rollable tables. You can roll there and figure out where the villain started and try to connect those two dots. Like before I recorded this video, I did it, and I got open a magical gate or portal as what they're trying to accomplish now. And then in Xanathar's, I rolled on the table and got supernatural events, and a devil tempted them. And then there's a whole, like, make a check if you're making a player character to see what happens. But instead, I just said the devil tempted them and started leading them down this path towards darkness and deception and evilness, to the point where now they want to open up a gate to the devil's home plane and let the devil and their armies in. There you go. And so your villain has gone so far down the deep end that you might get like a last minute moment of remorse of like, what have I done? But you shouldn't be able to flip them before the final confrontation. They should be so far gone. And so you can use the DMG and Xanathars, and with Xanathars, like something that is made for player characters, but you can do something interesting by making it something that applies to your villains. Segue to using player options for making your villains more interesting. I'm going to throw it over to Riker from the Cleric Corner because he is going to share some subclass options that you can use to flavor your villains in really interesting ways. So Riker, take it away.
Thanks, Eric. Hello, everyone. My name is Riker from the Cleric Corner. I wanted to mention that when you're considering villains for your campaigns and games, that there are some often go-to subclasses that people generally gravitate towards. Subclasses like Oathbreaker Paladin, Assassin Rogue, or Undead Warlock. But what if you experimented with some not-so-common subclasses for your villain inspiration? What unique ideas could you come up with to impact your players with an adventure that they've never seen before? Let's look at the Divine Soul Sorcerer, for example, a goody two-shoes, if you will, but what happens if we turn them evil? I see a sorcerer that can cast Revivify, or Raise Dead, and in order to accomplish their mission to revive their father, the Avatar of War, they are reviving villains that the party had previously already dealt with. This causes enough distraction to keep the party busy, while they unleash a lawful tyrannical force upon the world, unless the party realizes it in time. So in your worlds, take inspiration from subclasses and archetypes that you may not have thought of before and see what avenues open up because of it. Thanks everyone, back to you, Eric.
Thanks, Riker. And if you enjoyed that segment, and Riker, he's a swell man, you can go check out the Cleric Corner, another channel. I'll put a link down there and maybe up there. And you can go check it out. And he is dropping a similar video that he just kind of shared, a much more longer, more fleshed out video on villainous subclasses. And you might recognize somebody that pops in during the video. So go check out his channel, give him a subscribe, and tell him I said hi. So like I said before, your villain should be a presence in the campaign. They shouldn't show up at the very end and all of a sudden pop in and be like, hi, I'm the person that you need to defeat to win the day. You should find ways to interject them in some manner. Curse of Strahd is a really great adventure for this, of like Strahd popping in every now and then to like talk to the player characters and mock them and or try to tempt them and all kinds of stuff. That's a good resource to look at for how to do this well. A really good example is a campaign that my first long form campaign, it was over 3 years. I was a co-DM with Philip, who is the DM for Kyber Shards here on the channel. And we also each had player characters that we would like alternate. But anyway, one of the player characters, not mine, started having reoccurring dreams with this like mystical woman that like her appearance was shrouded and she was talking to the player character. And specifically about this sword that the player character had. Dawnbreaker, I think was the name of the sword. And so anyway, you know, there was a lot of back and forth and the player character would communicate bits of the conversation to the rest of the party. And it appeared to be this very benevolent figure, but twist, it was the villain. And it eventually became apparent that they had more malicious intent. But then it became interesting that, you know, the villain was communicating with this player character the whole time. And so we knew a lot about her and her motivation and what she wanted. But at the same time, what she wanted was for the player character to bring Dawnbreaker, this like super powerful sword that dealt radiant damage, to her because she needed it for this ritual she was trying to complete. But at the same time, Dawnbreaker was going to be a really good weapon to use against her. But then do we take it? Because, And so that's a really interesting way to develop that connection with the party and the villain and present an interesting problem when the party goes to confront them. And a lot of times when you are trying to make your villain villainous, for lack of a better way to put it, there's an impulse to go big with it and like, you know, have them destroy a city or kill a group of NPCs that the party has grown to love and care for, or something else equally villainous and evil and dramatic. And that can work, especially to get the characters to hate your villain. But don't underestimate the mundane slights and the more personal things that a villain can do to really just irk the player characters and maybe the players a little bit. A good example from a recent episode of Eberron Renewed, the actual play podcast that I am the GM for. I'll put a link down there. We're in campaign 2 of the show. And in a recent episode, the party was sitting down talking to this female elf who runs a weapon smuggling operation. And one of the player characters is an artificer and is super into like tinkering and weapons and like making them. And so had this connection with this woman and like really wanted to like pick her brain and learn more about what she does. Well, then her boss walks into the room, who has been a antagonistic figure. I wouldn't call them the capital V villain, but the example still stands. So he walks in, and this woman pops up and says, "Hi, sir, what can I do for you?" And he thinks about it for a second, goes, "Coffee," and dismisses her, and then sits down in the chair that she was sitting in. And then he starts addressing the players. And boy, I could tell that my players really hated my villain in that moment, because he was demeaning to somebody that they liked in a really crappy way. And so stuff like that can almost be more effective, because as the stakes get bigger in your actions, they inherently become less personal. A player character is going to have a bigger reaction to the villain killing their mom as opposed to killing a city. And so that is something to keep in mind, is the more personal you can keep the villainous actions, the more return on investment you're going to get with those actions. And then lastly, kind of what I talked about is your villains should be resolute. You should role play them as being righteously convicted as your player characters probably are with their beliefs, and have them like be bought in to what they're doing and firmly believe that it may not be good, it may not be right, but it's necessary. And necessity is the number one driving force of villains. I feel like in most stories, in most compelling versions of villains, they may be able to acknowledge that what they're doing is wrong, what they're doing is monstrous, what they're doing is reprehensible, but it's necessary. And if you can craft a villain that does what's necessary, then you're going to have player characters that are going to feel very satisfied in bringing them low, because nothing makes a righteous person more angry than somebody who is just as righteous about something that they don't believe in. And so your player character is going to be really satisfied in their victory over this character. But the last thing I want to talk about is endings, like your villainous end. Because I say that defeating the villain should be satisfying, but it should not be a foregone conclusion. Philip, the DM for Kyber Shards here on the channel, has a great story about his home game where the villain won. The final encounter came, the party tried, and they failed. And he got the opportunity to do kind of a like Avengers Endgame time jump forward to see, okay, what happens because the villain won, because their final plans were brought to fruition. And now let's pick up the campaign and see if you all can fix things as best you can. And so just because the villain has a victory where you thought maybe the party was going to defeat them, doesn't mean that the party can't regroup, steel themselves, and go once more into that fight. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. Let me know villains that you've run down below. Did they work? Did your party enjoy defeating them? Or have you managed to pull off a morally gray villain that the players felt satisfied with the end? Let me know. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to go check out Riker over on the Cleric Corner. Very nice person, very wonderful, smart D&D man, and you should go support his channel as well. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time.